The readings from today have so much packed into them that it would be easy to kind of spread out and just get lost in all of them. So we are going to ponder the first 4 verses of Matthew's gospel this morning. So in these verses, Jesus calls Matthew, who is a tax collector. He eats dinner with many tax collectors, sinners, and his disciples. And the Pharisees try to call out Jesus for going against the religious norms of the day. On the surface, I could preach something like this. Jesus called Matthew. Matthew left his work and followed Jesus. So when you hear God's call, you should do the same. Jesus shared the dinner table with sinners, people who have been pushed out of community because they've been judged unworthy for one reason or another. We should be welcoming to the people in our own time who have been rejected or are excluded. The Pharisees in this story are demonstrating their foolishness and lack of understanding of what Jesus is doing and why he's doing it. Their understanding of God's law is all wrong, and they just don't get it. And on the surface, you could listen to me preach that sermon and head home after worship without giving it any thought whatsoever once you leave this building. Or maybe when Annette strikes the first chord of the hymn, it would just be right out of your mind. No challenges, you'd be securely in your comfort zone. No problems. I'm not going to preach that sermon today. So, we're going to talk about the Pharisees. They see what Jesus is doing, and based on their knowledge of the law, they ask a question. Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Now, they don't ask Jesus this question directly. They ask his disciples. And their question reveals their disdain and judgment of Jesus and his behavior, and it exposes Jesus dining with his dining companions as clear outsiders. As human beings, we create pecking orders, and I think that's part of what you see in this. So, pecking order, it's a phrase that we use, and I just want us to really think about what that means originally. So, I refer to my dictionary for this, all right? A pecking order is the basic pattern of social organization within a flock of poultry, in which each bird pecks another lower in the scale without fear of retaliation and submits to pecking by one of higher rank. Broadly, it is a dominance hierarchy in a group of social animals. Now, I know this is talking about a flock of poultry, but I'm thinking that we kind of fit within that too, right? The Pharisees, they don't confront Jesus directly. They confront the disciples who would have been lower in the pecking order. Their judgment of Jesus and those he dines with is based on their understanding of God's law, of their practice traditions, and their rituals. They are standing up for what they think is right, okay? That they are doing what they think is right. Now, are you all familiar with the song called Jesus, Friend of Sinners by the Casting Crowns? Jesus, friend of sinners. Okay, well, it's okay if you don't know it. Look it up on Google or YouTube after. But when I read through this text, that song just kept playing over and over in my head. And it's woven in the sermon today. So, again, if you know it, great. And if you don't, it's okay. Just look it up on YouTube after worship. It begins with, Jesus, friend of sinners, we've strayed so far away. We cut down people in your name, but the sword was never ours to swing. The Pharisees are doing just that, evoking God and God's law to rationalize their judgment. They have created a boundary with themselves, along with those they see as worthy on one side, and those they deem as unworthy for whatever reason on the other. We have the insiders and the outsiders. And they work to maintain this insider-outsider boundary, and the law of God has become the tool that they use to do that. Jesus, his teaching and his actions, they are a threat to this boundary. So when Jesus encroaches on this boundary, they defend it with God's law. They invoke God's law. The Pharisees are asking, why did Jesus choose these people who clearly don't deserve to be sitting at a dinner table with him? A teacher. They are undeserving sinners. They're outsiders. And maybe they're saying to themselves, we're the religious leaders. We're the ones who Jesus should have invited. Why didn't he choose us? We are righteous. We are the insiders. Jesus, friend of sinners, the truth becomes so hard to see. The world is on their way to you, but they're tripping over me. Always looking around, but never looking up. Double-minded, a plank-eyed saint with dirty hands and a heart divided. The hard thing to recognize is that we are more like the Pharisees than we are willing to admit. Whether we're talking about society in general, our workplaces, and yes, even within the walls of the church, we create and participate in the hierarchy of a pecking order. And we absolutely do not want to be on the bottom of the pecking order. So we also create boundaries that sort out the insiders from the outsiders. We make judgments based on our understanding of what is acceptable, our experiences within the pecking order, and our traditions and our rituals. We view our community's way of understanding and doing things as the gold standard. And we compare everyone and everything else up to our perceived superiority, our gold standard. All of us, including me, are capable of handing down harsh judgments of people and their traditions that don't fit into our idea of what we see as normal. We are especially liberal with our judgment when folks are lower than us on our perceived pecking order. And when it comes to pecking order, it exists within the walls of this church too. We notice who comes to worship and who doesn't. I'm here, why aren't they? If they came to church, they would know that we do things this way. We notice that some people never volunteer to do anything at the church. I'm always here volunteering my time. We might think that others are not as generous as we think that they should be. I mean, after all, I'm generous. They should be too. Now, you get the idea. This practice of pecking order is alive and well within the church too. This list is exhaustive. Oh, Jesus, friend of sinners, open our eyes to the world at the end of our pointing fingers. Nobody knows what we're for, only what we're against when we judge the wounded. May the righteous turn away and the stone fall from our hands. If we think about Matthew, he would not have been in the temple worshiping God or doing ministry on behalf of God because he was seen as unworthy, an outsider. He was in the business of collecting taxes from people, so he certainly was not the paradigm of generosity. But Jesus calls Matthew an outsider, a flawed human being. He doesn't try to make Matthew fit into some acceptable boundaries, and he totally ignores the created pecking order when he invites the sinners to share dinner with him and his disciples. Oh, Jesus, friend of sinners, open our eyes. Let our hearts be led by mercy. Help us reach with open hearts and open doors. Break our hearts for what breaks yours. Help us remember that we are all the least of these. Let the memory of your mercy bring us to our knees. What if we put down our signs, crossed over the lines, and loved like Jesus did? Matthew had a choice to follow Jesus or not. We have the same choice. And we need to make that choice every minute of every day because we will fail. We will fall short. Just remember that Jesus invites us, sinners, to dine at his table. Jesus loves every lost cause and reaches for the outcast. Jesus is the reason that we're all here today. So even when we feel like a lost cause, even when we feel like an outcast, Jesus died for sinners just like you and me. This is good news indeed.